Thank you for joining this webinar. So as Kelly said, I'm Fabrice Lacroix, the founder and CEO of Free Topics. So you can see my email address and feel free to reach out to me anytime. And what we do at Free Topics, we are a new breed of software solution, which is called a content delivery platform. So the purpose of a CDP is to go beyond the classical document delivery model, where the document disappears and what we provide access to is information, fragments of information, the right info that you need, not the documents. So for that, the CDP collects all the data sources that needs to be part of this, transform the content, enriches the content, then creates this delivery. It's content as a service through API, turnkey portals, and so forth. And we as well optimize the way people access content, track the usage, and so forth. So that's the idea. And as you can imagine, part of this experience for accessing content is based on search. So this is the subject of today's presentation. We're going to talk about search. What is a good search experience? What it takes, and how to get prepared for that. What is interesting is that basically when we receive RFPs from prospect customers and customers, we receive a long list of questions, hundreds of questions in those RFPs, and there are a few of them around search capabilities. So needless to say that because that's where we come from. We've been in the search business for 20 years. We have proprietary search technology, so we tick all the boxes. So we're quite good at that. And what we see still is that questions that really matter about search are often missing. So for sure, you say, do we have facets? Do you have auto-completion? Do you have few of the features that you expect? But the real questions that make search different are missing in those RFPs. And I think the first way we really experienced that gap between what was asked in the RFPs and what people were expecting happened to me, I think it was like 2 years ago. So I was visiting a customer in Canada, and they had selected 3 topics, and they had made a very, very in-depth evaluation of the search capabilities of the different vendors. So they chose us because we were leading the competition, crushing everybody. But still, so we had this meeting, implementation was done, everybody was fine. And I was meeting 15 stakeholders, including people from customer support, customer success. And suddenly one person from around the table said, you know what we have, well, it's not exactly that. You know what? We want Google. I said, what? You want Google? You have 3 topics. I said, no, it's not. I don't want to switch. I'm happy with 3 topics. We're all happy with 3 topics. But again, we want something like Google. So I said, what do you mean by you want something like Google? And that was very interesting because basically it took a lot of discussion to make people really state what was behind this, meaning what they meant by we want Google. And basically that was around having this sort of experience that looks like being magical. We all have had this experience with Google, like it's like reading your mind almost. You start typing and it's there. So I think what this person was expressing is that regardless of what was asked in the RFP, regardless of the quality of what we had delivered, in fact, they wanted something that was closer to what you experience every day on the web, less enterprise, more web. You see what I mean? And anything less in terms of experience is now frustrating for the users. So that's a little bit of today's topic. What is it, this sort of personalized experience, magic search experience that Google offers? I think the first point when we talk about search experience is relevance. So that's the key point. So what is relevance? So first, this part of the relevance is what we call the core relevance, which is language dependent. How good is the search at finding the documents that contains the keywords that you use, the phrase that you use, how you query the system? So it's very much related to the linguistic processing capabilities, stemming, flexions, decompounding, like disaggregating words, transliteration, like for example in Japanese when you have multiple alphabets, synonyms, further supports. So it's finding the right documents and then ranking them. So it's providing the right ranking, and we'll talk about that later. So that's the core relevance. And then as well, there's another aspect of relevance, which is your capability to influence the core relevance by putting on top of that your business rules, by some products, by type of documentation, like you would like to have reference guides being more weighted than troubleshooting instructions or something like that. Could be freshness, latest version first for the software, all that. So it's something that you would put on top of that to bend the default rankings mechanism, but that's part of the relevance. And the cool thing is that I've never seen something more subjective than relevance. You can ask 10 people around the table what should be the result, the right search result for that query. I think you will have 10 different replies, and people are different sensitivity to different types of documents and all that. So it's highly subjective. That's why it's always very difficult to fine tune the search. But the thing is that it can be scientifically done. There's a lot of documentation, tools, and methodology around that. You can really measure objectively, the relevance of a search using what is called MAP, mean average precision, precision at 20, and DCG. So there's a lot of ways to score the relevance. And when you change the rules, making sure that your relevance is increasing and not decreasing. And I've seen very, very few companies asking for that. I had never seen a customer asking about our relevance principles, how we measure it, what are our scores, and that's cool. So it's pretty weird, and that's part of the gap that what I was mentioning. We see a lot of questions in the RFPs about the coverage, the features, but not about how do you measure the relevance of your search and what is your score. And by the way, do you know what is the score of your search engine, the MAP score, and that you should have that. So that's one aspect of the search experience is how relevant is your search, and can you increase this relevance by tweaking and changing the rules. And I was still, after this meeting in Canada, I was still thinking about it, and it put me in a weird state where I was always thinking about that. I said, okay, how can we increase the relevance? What do they mean by that? I want Google. And true story, a few months after that, I was in Prague visiting, and I was in front of that building called the Dancing House by Frank Gehry. Because I wanted to have some history on this landmark, I took my phone and I started typing two letters, DA for Dancing House, and immediately, just after two letters, I had this Dancing House Prague reply on top. Say, oh my God, it's exactly what we feel like Google is magic and mind reading sometime. It's like really you do type two letters and that's exactly what you need. And I had this aha moment, say, okay, that's what they mean by the Google, I want Google. And this is all based on context. So basically said, okay, so providing a better search experience is leveraging context. So, okay. And then the week after that, I came back home and I was in my coach doing some searching for something. I was still on Google and I typed a few letters, money, you see 4 letters, and then always trying to understand what it meant, this I want Google thing. And I started analyzing the suggestions of Google. And I could see that the first suggestions were related to my past searches. So that's what I've been looking for. And indeed, 2 weeks earlier, I bought a portable display for the trade shows. And the other suggestions were all related of something that was of interest to me because it was related to sites I had visited earlier or searches I had done before. So I say, okay, so Google leverages history. So it knows about me, it learns, and it has the history of my search, and it's leveraging that to create this sort of better search experience. And the next experience we made, so I went to my VP research, Jerome, and said, okay, Jerome, I'm working on that. And I would be, I need you to do some Google searches with me in parallel at the same time, and that we share what we have on our screen at the same moment. So, and we ended up doing searches like H2O, and you can see we were taking screenshots of our screens, and you can see that for Jerome, the H2O reply page is first H2O.ai, which is a framework for artificial intelligence, which regarding the fact that his VP research makes sense, and more, and he has video suggestions and stuff like that. And I have a totally different page. For me, it was wireless mobile subscription and different stuff. So that was interesting to see that there was really intense, heavy personalization of the search result page as well. And I think that's part of this I want Google. You have something that is matching your profile, your expectations very much. So I was still thinking about this and say, okay, what is a good search? How should we increase the search experience that we provide in 3 topics? And then I ended up with this, came to me this example, which is a real life example. So imagine you enter a shop to buy a new phone. Okay, so that's the dialogue that you could have with the sales guy. So, okay, hi, I'm looking for a new mobile. And then the sales guy notices that you have this Samsung in your hand. So it tells you, okay, we have the latest Samsung S10 5G at 1300 and this Huawei at 1250. And then you reply, well, my budget is 500. So the sales guy says, okay, then I can recommend the Honor 20 at 490. I would prefer a Samsung. Then we have the S9 4G, blah, blah, blah. It's 594, 549, and usually 749, but we have this limited time discount of $200, so that should fit your budget. So, okay, good deal indeed, I take it. So very basic dialogue. So interestingly, the sales guy is just a search engine. So what you experience when you have this sort of interaction is basically you run a search. So the interface is a human, but basically the guy is a smart search engine. And basically that's how it works. So you say, I'm looking for a new mobile, and the guy notices this old Samsung you have in your hand. So that's the context. You remember the context in front of the dancing house. And basically what the sales guy does is transforming this part of the dialogue into a search. And the guy knows the catalog. So basically he's just searching mentally in the catalog with few criteria, like, okay, brand, the guy is a Samsung, so brand should be a Android phone, should be in stock because otherwise the guys would have bought online. And I can propose something that is techy and trendy with high margin, better for me as a vendor. Then I reply, well, my budget is 500. So then somehow a new criteria is added to the query. And the price range 400, 500, which leads to this reply order 20 at 490. And then you say, okay, I would prefer Samsung. And then probably what the guy does in his ad is rewriting the query on the fly. Say, okay, Samsung and not just any Android phone. Still in stock, price range, and discount if possible, because obviously we have a price issue here. So as you can see, that's really what happens. And that's a very good search experience that you have, because at the end, you got the reply that you expect. It's matching your expectations, and you buy the phone. If we look at that from a search perspective, what is interesting and complex here, and what is something that human can achieve pretty well, and that is more complex with technology, especially with standard technology, is that when you search for a Samsung mobile phone costing less than or 500 or 300, whatever the price, then if you start using facets, filters, okay, and you just click on this 200, 300 price range, everything that is above 300 would be excluded. 310 would be excluded, and which is not what we want. In fact, we want phones that are costing around 300, and the other one that are more expensive rank lower. So it shouldn't be a filter. that should just re-rank the results. You see the difference by removing results and re-ranking, taking into account such parameter. So, which is a challenge with today's technology. And that's why what a guy can do when you talk to this sales guy is better than regular search technology, because a human can in some way adapt the parameters and turn some parameters as filters, hard limits, like I want a Samsung, and some parameters can become preferences, and like 300 could be 320, for example. And making with technology, making a facet not a hard limit but a preference is something that is pretty complex, as we will see. So obviously, to create a better search experience, we need probably technology that is more adapted to what we try to achieve. So that was where I ended up after this discussion and few months of research about the subjects. Like, okay, meaning the I want Google meaning, real meaning is, okay, we need something that is relevant, tunable for you, but as well smart. That's the thing that adapt to the price and is some sort of fuzzy logic, contextual, personal, and that learns. So, which is quite a long list and difficult list to achieve. So, can we do that with TechDoc? And what does it take for you? How can you get there? And what does it take? So that's the next part. So spoiler alert, you need three things for that. So I will give you the reply first, and then we'll dig into the different aspects. So first, to achieve that better experience, you need tagged granular content. So that's a prerequisite. Then second, you need rich user profiles. You need to know something about the people that query the system. And first and foremost, you need technology that supports the use cases. So let's dig a little bit into that, and especially start with tagged granular content. So what do I mean by that? So basically, content granularity has a very strong impact on relevance. Okay, so that's pretty easy to understand. Imagine that you only have PDFs, okay, on your website, and the search is only indexing long PDFs, 100 pages, 200 pages, 500 pages PDFs. The longer the document, the more chance that all the keywords are in the document, okay, because it talks about everything. So it means that regardless of the keyword that you type, those documents will always come first in the search result list. So meaning that it's easy to become relevant. It's like, say, okay, the reply is like, it's in the book, it's in the book, it's in this book, it's in the book. It's not what people expect. They don't want a book, they want a reply. So that's the problem with long documents. They talk about too many subjects. On the opposite side, if you have very, very small fragments of content, like 1 or 2 lines, say, for example, content that you have written for chatbots. I know there is a huge trendy stuff about chatbot, and sometimes you will see people telling you that you have to rewrite content for chatbots, making very small replies and re-architecture your content. So the problem is that if you have this very, very fine-grained content and you index all those fragments separately, there may be 10, 20, 30 words in it. So there are less chances that when people start entering more complex queries with multiple keywords, that the fragments appear in the search result list. So there is an impact, as you can see, there is an impact on the two sides of the spectrum, where if you have too small documents or too long documents, then the relevance will be less. So that's part of what you have to a problem that needs to be solved. So what are the solutions for that, against that? Well, either you adapt your source content, okay? So we say that you index the content as it is, either the long documents or the short fragments, but then you would have to adapt the source content to have smaller documents or longer fragments, which probably not what you want to do. 2, you can derive content from that, generate static content at an intermediate granularity. It's like you sort of collapse smaller fragments so that they become longer when you index them, so that there is more context and more keywords in them. Or if you come from the opposite side, you just have very, very long documents, probably chunk those documents into smaller documents, index at the section level or something like that, but it would mean chunking the documents or something, so not that easy either. And three, that's let the technology solve the problem for you. So keep your content as it is and have an indexing mechanism that you can tune, configure so that it adapts dynamically the granularity at which it indexes, regardless of the granularity of the content itself, or as it is in the source. So let's say, for example, you have data content and you have very, very small topics, few lines. Probably you could ask the search, a better way would be to configure the search engine to index probably at the section level or subsection level, something that aggregates multiple smaller topics into a longer section. So then you don't have to change your content, and you rely on the technology to adapt to what you have. So that's one aspect. So we said tagged granular content. So granularity has an impact on the search experience, so you have to be aware of that. Second point is tagged. The other aspect is tagged. It's about content metadata. So it's metadata handles for manipulating content. Usually it's creation date and author and product and version and all that. So you have a lot of them, more or less. Or at least you are now aware that it's important, and you start creating metadata on your content. And those metadata are important because they can be turned into facets, for example, which are those blocks on the left side for filtering content. Okay, metadata you can configure your search engine and say, okay, this metadata should be proposed as a facet, which somehow enhances the search experience. So the more metadata, the more opportunities, and the more you can do to offer filters to your users. Or it can be used as well to increase, to bend, to tune the ranking, as I described earlier, like we do in free topics. So you see this is a screenshot for free topics, where you can promote or demote categories of documents based on the metadata. So for example, here we rank higher, we put more weight on documents that are structured documents, content that is about free topics, which is our flagship product, latest version of the product itself, which is 3.9 right now. And for people that have access to that, we demote, we sort of lower the ranking of content that is in draft state. And you can use any metadata and then use that metadata for influencing the ranking. So you see, metadata is important because you can really use those metadata to increase, to change the relevance and to increase the user experience. Question being, what can I do to get more metadata? So basically, simple answer would be do it yourself, do it manually, enrich your content with metadata, meaning either you do that in your CMS, if you have a CMS, your CMS should support the metadata tagging at the document level, at the section level, at the topic level. So, but depending on what you have today and how many documents you have and how much work you have to do, that could be quite complex, but do it yourself. Or that could be as well, we support that maintained in separate files, like you don't have a CMS or part of your content is stored just on a file server because those are legacy PDFs. And then you have to put metadata on those PDFs as well. And probably you would do that in a CSV file or something else, and you could manage that separately. But regardless of how you do it, that's the same, do it yourself. That's one way of having tagged content. Another way of having more tagged content is using machine learning technology, which is pretty robust today. So that's an example of things we do, a real screenshot from what we do. And you see these examples here. This sample content comes from iFixit, and that's just an instruction on how to change the battery, I think, yeah, the battery of an iPad, and you see that a well-trained machine learning engine can see the tools, the parts, the product, the actions, the steps, everything. So that's, and then that could be used to tag the content itself. So it's about what product, what tools, whatever. So we can really mine the content, ask the machine to read the content, and then tag the content for you. So that's another way of doing. Doesn't mean that there is nothing to do because you have to train the system, but at least if you have a very um, a huge stock of legacy content and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents, probably doing that manually would take you months or years, and probably machine learning could be an option as well in that situation. So that's where we are. So we need granular tagged content, understanding that granularity has an impact on the relevance, and that metadata are important because you can propose facets or you can use them to adapt further the relevance. The second thing that you need to create this advanced search experience is rich user profiles. So what does it mean? So basically, it's about building a digital representation of your users. For each user, you'll need to gather as much information as you can or create this information so that you can basically have a description, digital description of the user. And the info that you can collect can come from for building this twin, this digital twin, can come from multiple sources. That may be something that you already know about the user. For example, you have a CRM, and the CRM, you know what product the company has acquired from you. So you can say, okay, this user is supposed to have that product. Or you have a directory somewhere in your company describing your users, and probably they belong to groups. There are customers, resellers, partners, VIP, whatever. Or then you may have a help desk tool as well, and probably in this help desk tool you can find information describing people, if their level of expertise or something like that. So that's something that you have in your systems, and that could be exposed and that could be leveraged to build this representation of a user. That could also be something that the user declares. Like if you propose this screen and people can say, okay, my preferred language is English, my preferred types of document is ref guides or whatever, that could be declared by the user. And this could be made as well, this representation of the user could also something that is learned over time and that is built by the technology itself. So this could be derived by looking at content consumption. We'll talk about that later. But that could as well be numbers that you don't have any idea what they mean. But basically, they are computed by the system, and they are sort of a represent something about the user that will be then leveraged by the technology itself, by the stack itself. So that's exactly what Google does. Google has built a representation of you, and when you search this vector, this set of numbers information is used dynamically, injected in your search query to adapt the search results. So starting again with the first part, the first set of information that you have about your user. So as we said, you probably have information in your CRM, in your directory as well, and you have to expose that to the front, to the system, to the search. So the search has to have access to this information. So how do you do that? Well, you have two ways of doing this. So one way is you have a single sign-on system on top of, okay, for example, Free Topics natively supports SAML, OpenID, and all those single sign-on protocols. And you can configure your IT landscape so that your single sign-on layer is able to aggregate this information from all those data sources and send that back as part of the single sign-on process. So it means that you will have to involve your IT, telling to your IT that you need to connect your CRM to your single sign-on, your help desk to your single sign-on, or do something because you need this info sent back to the CDP, which is not that obvious, that simple. So, which is why you can have other options like that we support in free topics, where when people authenticate, we fetch the info that exists in the directory, which is then pretty standard, and in real time we can then connect to other systems and query to get more info on the fly and update this info each time people connect. But that's part of the work to be done. There's no magic here. At some point, the delivery layer, the CDP, needs to be to get access to that info one way or the other. The second set of personal information I talked about was the user preferences. So as well, that's something we do in free topics. You can let people declare what they prefer. So personal values here, like change priorities. They can tell, this is my preferred set of content. This is my preferred target operating system when I develop or framework or whatever makes sense. And again, it's based on metadata. So basically, the way people select those values, give preferences, is usually something that is matching metadata as well. So you present them with metadata and metadata values, and then they can choose among that. So this is where there is a strong relationship between user profile and metadata, especially user-defined preferences. Another way of enriching the user profile, as I described, is letting the system, if you have good enough technology, letting the system learn by looking at the user's behavior and then build part of the profile automatically over time. So you remember this H2O query. So imagine that you have 3 users running the same query. The same query may mean something totally different for each of them. So H2O for someone that has been previously searching on deep learning, CUDA, LTSM, or whatever keywords relating to AI, then you could understand that H2O is more related to this H2O.ai framework. As opposed to a user that has been searching previously on energy, ecological transition, you can infer that H2O is more related to water. And a third user searching for H2O while having searched previously for mobile, family plan, and all that. So, so that's something that you can really learn from. You can, by looking at what people search, all the documents they access, even if they don't search, direct links, or probably they've searched somewhere else, or documents they prefer, depending on what those documents talk about, you could infer a profile and say, okay, this is the preferred subject of this user. And that's something that becomes part of the profile. So for that, you need a very strong analytics backend that tracks down every user interaction. So the system has to record all the searches, all the keywords, all the documents that are accessed, time spent on the different sections, so that it's collecting info, and then by mining this info, learns the preferences and derive information about the user. Interestingly, you may wonder how Google is that good. I'd like to remind you about the fact that some people tend to forget. When people was created in 1919, they were just at the beginning tracking the searches of the users. So, okay, just this first part. And they realized that they were lacking a lot of info, a lot of details about the users, and they needed to track them beyond the search itself. So what they did, and it was very smart, they acquired 2 companies. They acquired a company called Urchin in 2005 and another company called MeasureMap in 2006. And they merged the 2 companies to create Google Analytics. So Google Analytics has not been written and invented by Google. It's derived from 2 acquisitions they made. And they've built this product, which is an amazing product. We all agree on that. Certainly one of the best web analytics tool on the market. And the thing is that it's free. So not only is it good, but it's free. So most of the companies in the world use Google Analytics. I think we're close to 50% or more than that. And the reason Google give you this tool and is not making you pay for that, it's because they need to track users. And by giving you this tool for free, when you use Google Analytics, then Google know what people read. And that allows them to track users beyond just the search. So they needed that because, as I said, you need to track not only the search, but as well what people is reading. And because Google is not providing content, the only way they could track the user's behavior when they were reading content is by letting you install a tracker on your website. And for that, the tracker is Google Analytics. So that's interesting to see that Google is offering this tool because they need to track those users. And once you have this in place, whether it's Google with Google Analytics or yourself, you have a CDP with the proper capabilities and the right technology. So you have those logs and you know exactly what people search for and what document they access the most. And you can put that, imagine it's pretty simple. You can put that in a huge table. So the lines are the users, the columns are the documents. So if you have 500,000 pages, then you have of content, or 500,000 topics, then you have 500,000 rows. And if you have 20,000 users, you have 20,000 lines. So that's a huge table. And in each square, you can put how many times the user has read this topic, read this document, or same for the queries. Because queries are document of 2 words. You can turn any query into a document and pretend a query is a document. So that fits well into this table model. So basically, you just build this table based on the logs, and then you just sort of run data mining algorithm at scale that can find a correlation, say, okay, I'll find groups of people more interested in groups of documents. This is how it works. That's very simple, in fact. The principle is pretty simple. So basically, the technology will compute and discover groups of people interested in clusters, groups of documents. And then when you have those groups of people, if you start looking at the group itself and you know that, well, interestingly, most of these people have product-free topics or are experts or are located in or are field technicians, so that's something you already know about those people, then you can say, okay, then I will propagate that info on the content itself and say, this content looks like it's more interesting to field technicians, people that have free topics or experts. See what I mean? So you can enrich that by propagating what you know about the people to the content itself. And conversely, when you have built this correlation matrix, you can see what's inside the content itself. You remember we have this technology to mine the documents, discover what's inside the content, or you have metadata, or you have all these things, and you can propagate that back to the users because they are related cluster groups of users, and then enrich the profile of your users automatically, and then add more information about the user. That's how we build the digital twin. And we can say, okay, this guy is more interested in ecology, or this guy is more interested in AI. So derive and enrich your profile with subject of interest to you. So this is how it works. Long story short, pretty simple. And then you end up having huge, rich user profiles made of info from the directory, from your CRM, user declared, but as well derived from analytics. And the same way you can enrich the content, enrich the documents, and have finely tagged and enriched documents. So that's what is required for creating this new, this enhanced user experience. But it's not enough. I mean, that's a prerequisite. If you don't have metadata, if you don't have a user profile, if you're not able to build a user profile, if you're not able to have enough metadata on your content, you'll never get there. So that's something that is a prerequisite, but it's not enough. And the thing that you need after that is the right technology to leverage all those rich profiles and rich documents. So in really few slides, 5 slides, so that you understand why you need technology and adapted better technology, is by understanding how search technology works. And when I say search technology, you'll see I mean the one that most of you have access to on the market. So basically, how the search works, pretty simple. You type something in the search box, H2O, and then the search engine goes through the documents and try to find all the documents that contain H2O. So, and then once you have this selection of document, then you have to rank them. So select the candidates, rank them to generate the search result list. Very simple. So both steps are somehow done at the same time, but really that's two aspects of it. So how is relevance done? Because pretty simple. Before 1970, that was very simple. That was very long time ago, not very powerful computers. Basically, it was just about counting the number of times the keyword was appearing in the document. So the more the keyword in the document, the better the document. Well, I don't talk about linguistic, semantic processing. Imagine that could be written differently, could have synonyms. So assume this is all done well, but basically ranking was about counting the keywords that you were searching for in the documents. And there has been a big shift at that time in 1968. And a guy named Gerald Salton introduced something called vector space model and a new weighting scheme, a new way of ranking, computing a score of a document, which is, put it simply, don't count the numbers at the number of time, but care about word density. So if you just look at the number of times, document 4 would be ranked first because the keyword H2O appears 3 times, okay? But according to the TF-IDF weighting scheme and the VSM model, in fact, document number 3 is better because maybe H2O appears only 2 times, but the document is very short. So H2O is somehow more, the document is more about water, document 3 than document 4. See the principle, that's it. So it looks simple when I tell you that, but at that time, that was in some way a revolution. And interestingly, this TF-IDF scoring system that was invented in 1968 is still the scoring system that exists inside Lucene, which is the core search library that is used by Solr and Elasticsearch. Okay, so it means that the search technology that exists on the market today and that you have access to is based on technology that is more than 50 years old. Can you believe that? And you can find that in the documentation. That's the documentation of Elasticsearch. The score of a document D versus a query Q is the TF-IDF. You see the formula is the TF-IDF formula. That's it. So until recently, that was pretty okay because basically search was mostly about finding the documents that had the keywords. And the score is somehow the TF-IDF score. That's the SVM part. The problem that we have, and that we have discussed earlier, is that now we have a lot of info about the user. We have a lot of info about the documents themselves with metadata. And the question is, how do we use this information, this digital twin of a user, all this info that we have, and how do we inject that in the scoring mechanism so that the documents are ranked differently, so that the final list is more personalized. So it means that basically you want the score of a document, not only take into account the keywords, but you would like to say, I would like to give more weight to document about this subject, product 3 topics, because this user has 3 topics, or this user is an expert, group A, so I want to give a little bit more weight on documents of group A. So that's exactly what you want. You want to add more parameters in the scoring system, and you want to use this info that you have and that we have seen earlier. So the problem is that these values have absolutely nothing in common. So usually TF-IDF values are something that the values are something like 0.00000, it's even smaller than that. It's like very small numbers. And the value itself depends on the number of document, the type of document. So it's it's not like I can tell you it's always between this and this. It depends and it evolves over time. And then you have things like product, which is a taxonomy node, like product equals 3 topics. So there's no number behind that. And if you want to add a date to that, like something that is less than published after May 29th, well, that's a date. So how do you add a date to a number to a model value, like a product L3 topics? How can you compute that? You cannot, it's an apple and oranges problem, you see? There's no simple answer. So it means that people that try to do that have to transform those values into numbers, and then you have to apply mathematical functions, normalize the number, find out the fit together. And it's so complex that you can find tons of conferences on the web that people explain that they spend on this guy, which is really an expert, explained that it took him a year and a half just to add 2 parameters or 3 parameters to the TF-IDF model, to Lucene. A year and a half of work, 3 parameters only. And here we are talking about tens of parameters. Can you imagine that? Another guy is describing, same, using Solar, Lucene, and all that. This was Solar here, that just to add freshness for boosting more recent documents took him 6 months. Can you imagine that? So it shows that the technology that exists today was designed 50 years ago to rank document just based on keywords. And it's not adapted to being more dynamic and in having ranking equations that can have as many parameters as you need and any type of parameter. So that's the problem that you will have. That's why I say part of the problem is the technology itself, because the technology that is available on the market, mostly available in the market, is not designed for these new use cases, and you cannot do this Google thing with Solar or Elasticsearch. So on our side, a little bit of advertising, because we are search experts. That's what we do since 20 years. We've spent 5 years of research and then 3 years for coding that to design a new ranking model, which is probabilistic ranking. And that basically allows us to take any parameter on the fly, basically. So that's when you search for mobile phones, more priority to Samsung brand, and something around $500. Then exactly the query, which is high level, becomes the ranking system. So it's very dynamic. And so that's why, so we had to design, because nothing was existing on the market. So we had to design. It took us 7 years when we started that in 2013. It took us 8 years now to go from seeing the need of having technology that could sustain the use case I described to having this technology ready. Because believe me, it's so strategic and it's so complex that all the companies that have developed something like that, like Google did or other people did, never shared what they did. Interestingly, they just share technology that is outdated. And all this sort of technology is so new and so strategic and so makes such a difference that you won't find anything on the market that works properly for this sort of use case. So that's why I was mentioning this need of, yes, you need rich, fine-grained content, and that's the wrap-up. You need a lot of info about your users, but you need as well technology that can ingest all these rich profiles, rich information, metadata, scheme about the content, and make that part of the ranking system. And then you'll get relevance that is more dynamic and that create this personalized user experience. So that was what I wanted to share with you today. How not, I wouldn't say complex, but that it's not as obvious as it seems, and that there's suddenly a gap between what we see on the market people expect, or at least what they express as needs in their RFPs, what end users expect. And at some point, the gap between the two becomes visible, and you should be careful about that when you start searching and implementing a new a CDP, which is basically what we do at 3 Topics for those of you that don't know us. So we help tech companies deliver next-gen content services, including those personalized search experience that is an intense field of work for us, so that we transform customer support and field operations. So we are very happy and proud to work with those many companies in the world to help them achieve this transformation and increase their business efficiency. And as you can see here, which is my last slide, part of the product, part of three topics is exactly what I've described. The stack itself embeds content repository, the search engine itself, with including the new search Taruka search engine that I described that we are going to release officially in July, and analytics as well, because it's part of what is needed to create those rich user profiles, as well as metadata enrichment, which is one of the things that you need to create this enhanced user experience. So, and basically that's really at the core of three topics, having these metadata enrichment, analytics, search engine working together to provide this advanced user experience that people expect. I think that's it for today and for my presentation. So thank you. And I think that now we can discuss, and I'd be very happy to discuss about all your questions that you have.
All right, thanks, Fabrice. So again, if you have questions for Fabrice, please type them in the questions dialog box. It looks like so far no one has. Often while you're speaking, people type the questions and then you kind of forget the context of the question, but so now it can be fresh in everybody's mind. Let's see, here we go.
Please don't be shy.
I was going to say, and please don't type them in French. No.
I could. For search evaluation. Okay. I've got a question about search evaluation, which is what I talked about at the beginning, saying, what is the score of your search engine? What is the relevance? Do you measure the relevance of your search? I can talk 2 minutes about the methodology. It's very, very fun to do. So basically, the way it works is that you gather a set of people and you say, okay, let's imagine queries that are representative of a problem, okay, real queries of the real world. So you ask people around you, like not too generic, because it's very difficult to assess the relevance on something that is generic, like H2O. I mean, H2O is too generic on Google. You couldn't tell that one document is better than another because there's something that depends on the user. But if you're in it, because here the domain will be your documentation, your content, your business, probably you wouldn't face the same issue, but still you have to select, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 queries that you design that are more or less complex and more or less targeting some very specific content. And then you have to find people that know enough the content so that basically what you do, well, the way it works is basically you run the query and then you take like the first 50 results and you say among those first 50 results, which one are good, which one shouldn't be here at all, it's irrelevant, which one are here and should be here, and are we missing something? Are we missing documents that we know exist and are not part of the first whatever? And then there's a way to rank that and put values on that. So something that is part of the result list among the first results and shouldn't be here, it's -3 points. You see, there's something like that. And you've got a UI for that, though. Basically, that's why I was mentioning methodology and tools. So there is a UI, and basically you take few people, and each person will do the same work, taking the query, running the query, and start to evaluate the query based on her perspective. So for me, this document is good, this document is good, but not enough, or something is missing, or this document is not good at all, irrelevant. And each people do that, and for the 10, 15 queries, and basically generate a score, okay? And there's a score for that, and that's very interesting to see. The thing is that what is complex is that, well, if you have the right tool, it's pretty fast to do. I think the longest part is to prepare the queries and know what documents should be here and so forth. And then that gives you a score. And each time you change the ranking, you tune the rankings, the ranking of the system. you should redo the exercise. So that's what we do here internally with free topics. The default ranking that we provide, because we provide you with a default ranking, we have tools and methodology, and we pre-rank the search for you, and we do that, and we regularly rerun this session of evaluation to get the score and see if the score is increasing or decreasing. Or ourselves on our own search engine for doc.antidote.net or doc.freetopics.com, if you go there, when we start, as I've shown earlier, start influencing the result by putting more weight on this type of doc, promoting about free topics, demoting draft documents, blah, blah. We start putting business rules like that. Once we've done that, we go through an evaluation session, and we make sure that the relevance is the perceived relevance by the majority is better than it was before. You cannot just rely on one person that is more aware on one type of content for one subject being the judge of the relevance of your search, because he's not this person is not representative of all your users. So that's the complexity of it. So it's that you're supposed to do this sort of evaluation.
Interesting. Yeah. So there's another question here about is it a good idea to create hierarchies of metadata? And then related to that is, what about knowledge graphs? So
okay. Hierarchies of metadata. I think it's a good idea for classifying content. Now, the question is, do you show the hierarchy as a hierarchy tree as part of the UI? And then when people start to drill down, this facet thing, do you present that as a tree, and what depth and what height of the tree? There's a lot of people that say you should never propose a tree for facets. You see what I mean? It's too complex from a cognitive perspective for people to start navigating a tree, unfolding branches and so forth. Or if you do that, that should be only 2 levels, first level, second level. Still, we see customers that are potentially more expert users that do that with 5 level of depth, and maybe the tree has 10,000 nodes, but it's very complex for people to navigate. So there are other ways in terms of the UX to transform that into things more like list, and then when you have selected, you have another list. See what I mean? From list to list, it's the same. You select the first level, and then we propose you the second level, but you don't see that as a tree. You don't have to unfold the branches.
Right. Yeah, and then a lot of times people just search anyhow, right?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. All right. So what about knowledge graphs? Where do they fit in?
I would say a knowledge graph is a way to link documents in the back end. It's more an abstract representation of the document, the body of knowledge, all the documents, all the fragments. So it's like you have all this information about the documents you have, the topics, the subjects, the people, a lot of things like that, nodes in the graph, and you start linking there. So that's something we do that's more a representation, but it's very difficult. Well, usually you don't show the graph itself to the people. You show something that is more an info box. If you take like Wikipedia, there's a graph behind Wikipedia, okay? Or in Google, there's DBpedia, which is a graph. And basically they just present the info in a flat way, and then you have the links to move from one info to another one. So you don't navigate a graph. You see that as info with links.
Okay. And then there's a question that came on pretty early on. How do you roll this out to an organization? Do you engage with customers or provide an ROI? I don't know what this is that you're rolling out. So Trish, if you want to elaborate on that, that'd be great. Are you talking about, yeah.
Let's assume that the rollout of a search engine with all the what I described, putting metadata and having the, how do you roll that out? Well, that two questions here. How do we roll it out? How do we provide ROI? Well, how do we roll that out? The more mature the technology, the less work you have to do. So basically, I mean, connecting to a directory, connecting to your CRM to fetch a profile of a user, well, for us, it's a matter of few hours of 1 day of work or 2 days of work, okay? Because the platform itself, Fruit Topics, is so mature that it's designed to be connected to those backend system and fetch the info on the fly. So there's no complex things to do to roll that out. Now, everything that comes with the analytics is part of the system. You don't have to do anything. That's our job, see what I mean? To collect the info, mine the info, enrich the profile of the users, make that fit into the search. So that's what we do every day when we develop. So you don't have to do anything to roll that out to your organization. It's more like it's the same work as rolling out something that is not providing these capabilities. The difference is it's better. That's what I mean. It's just better, and it's even should be even less work than rolling out something that is less mature. So no huge work here. So and everything I've described again is except maybe if you start putting metadata manually, which is not how you roll out a platform like Free Topics, but is how you enrich your content. I think, Cathy, you can talk about that as well, because you at CIDM, you help you, and I Comtech, you help your customers design taxonomies, design metadata schemes, and tag their content. So you help them do that. And I would say that's probably where there is the more work and the more cost. For everything that I've talked about today, almost everything comes out of the box of a few days of work, except one thing that we cannot do for you is tagging your content, especially if you are at the stage of manual tagging. Then the ROI depends on that work. If you already are pretty mature on metadata, well, it could be a matter of days. So the ROI, if you consider the ROI by integrating the cost of the rollout, very good ROI.
Right. All right, getting back to when you were talking about the tree structures and the knowledge map, how would you show that in the UX? How would you translate it into a UX? What's your opinion on that?
Oh, and if you don't use a tree, you mean, for the metadata and the hierarchy. Let's say you have a product, you have a hierarchy for your product. Okay, so let's say you have product line, like you do, I don't know, you sell cars or whatever. So you have sedan, convertible, pickups. See what I mean? It's like first level product line, types of product, and then you have the product themselves, and then third level you have variants of the product or whatever. So imagine that for your mileage may vary, as I say, so you can adapt to your whatever your company is doing. So instead of, well, you could do two things. You could say, okay, I have this taxonomy for organizing all my products that I have inherited from marketing, and I describe product line, product categories, products, variants, or whatever. And you can say, okay, that's a hierarchy tree, and I can put that, and people can unfold that, and then select the product that they have. Or you can say, okay, let's put just a list, which is the first level of the tree, which is the product category. Okay, and then when people select the product category, then you can make it dynamically appear a new facet, which corresponds to the part of the tree they have selected at the next level of depth. See what I mean? So it's sort of, you always present one list, and the list is matching where the people are in the tree. But it's the same. You can tell me it's the same. That's the same from a conceptual point of view. But in terms of UX and from an interaction standpoint, cognitive standpoint, it's easier for people to read a list than starting to unfold and inspect a tree. Because if you have the entire tree available on the screen and people start unfolding, before even clicking somewhere, in fact, they start to understand the structure of the tree. You see what I mean? They all start by opening the tree and say, oh my God, what are the nodes? Where are my products? Do you see what I mean? So, and just by the fact that they don't first make a decision, but they try to understand what's behind the tree and all the forest, should say, by unfolding everything. That takes them a lot of processing power. As opposed, if you propose one list, and to go to the next step, you have to make one decision. What is the product line? So now if it's difficult to make the decisions, probably because the product line, the name of the product line is not obvious for them regarding the product they have. See what I mean? So they say, I don't know, what is my product line for my product? See what I mean? That then means that your marketing has some effort to do, because the naming that you have on your product lines may not be good. But it's easier because then instead of one list, just check the list and say this, and they click. And because they have made a decision, then they can move to the next step. So you step the process for going down. So that would be a way of doing this sort of UI. So instead of doing trees, doesn't mean that you don't have a tree in the background, but you transform that into separate lists.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, Fabrice. Can you give us a preview, a hint of what's coming in your analytics, like the types of things?
I think that's certainly one of the things we've been investing the most time and energy in the past 2 years, because we feel that not only for the use case that I've just described for personalizing the search, but generally speaking, that's certainly something that is underestimated in terms of value. I mean, usually, and again, that's the same when we see, it's becoming more mature, but usually in the RFPs, the requirements that are the demands from the market regarding analytics are very, very limited, because they are framed based on what people do and know, which is basically Google Analytics. So they ask for very basic stuff. It's like most read documents, most search keywords. So, okay. But you can do so much more with analytics. I mean, you can, well, not only can you use those analytics to create profiles, rich user profiles, as I described today, but you can do things like, because that's something that we capture in real time. For example, you can do something that is more user-centric, because usually what people ask, what we see, they ask for something that is more document-centric. They want to understand how content is consumed, what are the most read documents, which is basically a demand that stems from the tech writing group, which is natural because those are the ones usually involved in writing the RFP and choosing the product. But if you were involving customer support or customer success in the process, probably what they would ask from the analytics is not what are the most read documents, because they don't care about that. They would say, I'd like to know, can I track in near real time what someone is doing, a particular user is doing, so that I can help that person in real time. Like, so a user is opening a ticket, okay, in the help desk tool, and you have to deal and reply to that person. And knowing what that person has done before, the keywords they have been searching for, the time they have spent in the different documents may give you a lot of information and help you better support that person, because you're informed in what you do. And that's interesting to see that when you look at analytics, there are two ways of using the same logs, so to say. Either you can be document-centric. Basically, you don't really care about who the people are individually, but you're more interested in knowing what are the preferred documents when people search, when they search this keyword, where do they go? Or you can be user-centric, which is for that particular person, what are the subject of interest? What are the most read documents? What are the usual concern? What did that person do in the past 24 hours before opening a ticket? Because then you would know as well that all the people that ask a question to the support or open a ticket in the CRM, in the help desk tool regarding that subject, maybe none of them have checked the doc before, or they have all checked the doc but couldn't find any info, or probably they were searching for this, that way, and then still ended up opening a ticket because the way the tech doc is written, or the way the words that are used for describing the problem, solving the problem, are not the one people use, and you're more specific about improving your doc and supporting your customers. So I think that's a place that's, and we're spending a lot of energy on that user-centric. That's the new thing for us, our new frontier. We've done the document-centric analytics. Now we are more interested in doing this user-centric analytics.
I look forward to seeing that. That's going to be nice. I'll be anxious. So related to that, someone asked, in a customer support success centric, can you also know what they are doing in the product itself?
Well, that would.
That's
a tough one. That's a tough one. I would say that it definitely depends on the type of product that you have. If you're a software vendor and your software is online, well, you can track that and correlate what people do in the software with what they read. And you can either have two analytics stack and try to match them, or that's something we can ingest in free topics. We can collect information that is not purely on what people do in free topics, but we can collect info that are what features they are using in the product and so forth. I would say it's more complex if the product is a machine tool, or I don't know. See what I mean?
Right.
Because it's not connected. But what you could imagine is trying to guess what people were doing by, and that's part of the user-centric stuff, by analyzing what part of the doc they are reading. Let's say you're trying to change the cartridge of your laser printer. Well, if you don't know how to do that, or I don't know, refill the oil in your whatever, in a machine, the oil tank or whatever, or change a filter in an engine, well, you don't know what the guy is doing because you don't have a camera, maybe you don't have a sensor in the engine, but probably by looking at what the guys, that person is searching and reading at that moment, you could infer what that person is doing. See what I mean? If that person is checking the doc on how to change how to refill the oil in the engine, probably you would know what that person is doing. At least, especially if they spend 10 minutes on or enlarge a drawing or something like that. So yeah.
A little bit, cool. All right, well, that's it for the questions right now. We did get a nice comment. Thank you for the interesting webinar, and I can confer with that. I agree. Any other questions for Fabrice? You can ask him now, or he does have an email. You can contact info@fluidtopics, and you can follow up there.
Be glad to. So thanks again.
Any parting words?
Thank you very much from me. I really appreciate you took time to attend the webinar. So, and again, don't hesitate to follow up. We'll be glad to discuss your different use cases and scenario.
Okay. Well, thank you for presenting, and we look forward to seeing you at the next CIDM event, whatever that may be.
So, be glad to. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.